At first, it was some 9-picture contract, and you know, there are parts of me that have a little bit of social anxiety with this.
What if I told you that Chris Evans didn't walk away from the MCU? He was erased, not retired, not written off, erased, like a chapter Disney no longer wants you to read.
It's sad not to be back with the band, but I'm sure they're going to do something incredible, and I'm sure it's going to be that much harder when it comes out and you feel like you weren't invited to the party.
Probably remember him as the face of hope, the man with the shield, the moral center of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But somewhere between Avengers, Endgame, and Phase 5's downward spiral, the man who literally saved the universe just vanished. No funeral, no closure, not even a name drop.
First, it was some 9-picture contract. All of a sudden, you're not responding well. Too bad. You got to suit up again. That was.
And here's the kicker. Evans didn't go quietly. He's been speaking up in carefully chosen words, exposing the truth behind the corporate machine that made him a star, and then treated him like a liability. So what really happened? Why did Disney distance itself from one of its most bankable, beloved heroes? And why is it that the character who carried the emotional weight of a billion-dollar franchise has been reduced to a vague rumor? He's on the moon or something. The answer isn't just disappointing, it's infuriating, because this isn't a story about a contract ending. This is about control, erasure, and the quiet betrayal of a legacy. It's about a man who dared to stand for something, even when it meant going up against the studio that owned his image, and how that choice made him too powerful to keep around. This is the story Disney doesn't want told. This is what happened to Chris Evans. Chris Evans didn't run toward Captain America. He hesitated. In fact, he turned the role down multiple times, not because he didn't believe in the character or the story or even the potential of the MCU, but because he saw the trap. Back in 2010, Marvel was offering more than a superhero gig. They were offering a 9-picture contract. That's not a job. That's a full-blown commitment. A near decade of your life locked into one identity, one image, one corporate voice. And Evans, despite all the muscles and charm, is, at his core, an anxious guy. He's spoken openly about his social anxiety and discomfort with fame. He knew that becoming Captain America meant more than just memorizing lines and suiting up. It meant giving up privacy, control, and autonomy, everything the studio wanted to own, package, and profit from. In one interview, he described it bluntly. If all of a sudden you're not responding well, too bad, you gotta suit up again. That's not excitement, that's fear. But here's where it gets deeper. That fear wasn't weakness. It was prophetic. Evans knew exactly what the machine was capable of. He understood what it meant to hand over your name, your face, your future to a company that could chew you up, build you into an icon, and then discard you the moment you stopped fitting the plan. And still, he said yes. Why? Because he felt the responsibility, not just to the franchise, but to the idea behind it. You can't play Captain America and experience fear, he said. It just clicked. He didn't take the shield because he wanted global stardom. He took it because he felt he had to. And that self-awareness, that humility, is exactly what made his version of Steve Rogers so deeply real. But Marvel didn't sign Chris Evans for his principles. They signed him for his face, his body, his image. And once he gave them everything, every scene, every interview, every ounce of his integrity, they did what corporations do best. They moved on, quietly, coldly, completely. Once Evans signed on, he didn't just become a character. He became the conscience of the MCU. In a cinematic universe filled with snarky billionaires, angry gods, and morally gray anti-heroes, Steve Rogers stood for something rare, unapologetic virtue. He didn't hunt for sport. He didn't chase fame. He stood firm. He listened. He believed. And Evans wasn't just playing it. He was it. He brought a quiet confidence and clarity to the role that elevated Captain America from side character to emotional anchor. His portrayal grounded the MCU in something bigger than explosions and catchphrases. It gave it a soul. From the first Avenger to Endgame, he was the through line, the moral spine that held everything together. The guy who jumped on a grenade before the serum, the guy who fought a literal god and held a broken shield in front of an alien army, the guy who whispered, "I can do this all day," and meant it. But what happens when the studio that profited from that image no longer wants that kind of hero? They rewrite the rules. Suddenly, the earnestness is too plain, the loyalty too old-fashioned, the values not not marketable anymore. Disney didn't just outgrow Chris Evans, they outgrew what he represented. They didn't want Steve Rogers, they wanted content. That's why there was no follow-up after Endgame, no flashbacks, no updates, just silence. Steve didn't pass, he didn't vanish, he passed the torch. But then Disney set that torch down and walked away. Because legacy doesn't trend, because integrity doesn't sell merchandise, because Chris Evans wasn't just a superhero, he was a reminder that stories can have meaning, that characters can have heart, that maybe, just maybe, we don't need another quippy cameo or multiversal gimmick. We just need a man with a compass. And that's something Disney couldn't control. Let's rewind to the final moments of Avengers Endgame. Steve Rogers doesn't pass. He doesn't vanish into some cosmic portal. He simply grows old. He passes the shield. He walks away. It was quiet, poetic, emotional, and also incomplete. Because what happened next? Nothing. There was no funeral, no reunion, no flashback, no closure. And that wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a scheduling conflict or a narrative oversight. That was a deliberate decision. Because bringing Steve back, even for a single line, even as a mentor, would have meant acknowledging the heart and soul of a universe Disney was already trying to leave behind. Chris Evans confirmed it himself in a now famous, eerily blunt statement. Just to be clear, I'm not in Avengers. Doomsday. No wink, no grin, no Marvel-style misdirection, just a straight answer, cold and honest. Marvel didn't wipe Steve Rogers. They ghosted him. And that ghosting? That's the part fans can't wrap their heads around. Because the character was still alive. In the MCU timeline, Steve should be a living legend, the very man who handed the shield to Sam Wilson. But in all the projects that followed, there's been zero reference to his whereabouts. Not a call, not a memory, just one throwaway joke about him being on the moon. The same Steve Rogers who stood toe-to-toe with Thanos is now a punchline? That's not just insulting, that's strategic. Marvel didn't want to deal with Steve Rogers anymore because Steve Rogers represents something they no longer value: consistency, depth, principle. And what happens when the most principled man in the MCU starts asking questions? Questions like, why hasn't Marvel acknowledged his fate? Why wasn't there a proper send-off? Why was his emotional journey cut short? Here's the answer: because the new era of Marvel is built on fast content, not slow meaning. And in that factory of cameos, Easter eggs, and algorithm-driven narratives, Steve Rogers is too much work. So instead of writing him out properly, they left him dangling. No arc, no tribute, just a quiet exile. And for Chris Evans, a man who gave 10 years of his life to build this legacy, that silence says everything. Chris Evans wasn't the first to be sidelined, and he won't be the last. Look around at Marvel's original Avengers lineup. What do you see? Scarlett Johansson had to take Disney to court just to get paid fairly for Black Widow. Jeremy Renner was quietly pushed aside after a real-life tragedy forced Disney to change plans. And when he returned, it was almost like they hoped you wouldn't notice. Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man himself, unfollowed the entire Marvel cast on social media after his exit, scrubbing most MCU-related posts. This isn't coincidence. This is the system working exactly as designed. Once these actors finished their primary contracts, once they fulfilled the obligations that made Disney billions, the company turned cold, strategic, detached. Because in the eyes of a media empire, the moment an actor stops being useful is the moment they become dangerous. Dangerous how? They know too much. They have opinions. Worse, they have leverage. And Disney? Disney doesn't like actors with leverage. It likes algorithms. It likes control. It likes actors it can own. But Chris Evans, he didn't play that game. Even while promoting Disney-backed projects like Lightyear, Evans took bold stances that went completely against corporate messaging. When asked about backlash over a same-gender kiss in the film, he didn't deflect. He didn't give the usual PR spin. He said this: the real truth is, those people are idiots. They'll be wiped off like dinosaurs. That's not a safe quote. That's a career-risking quote. But Evans said it on camera, in Disney's own press cycle. And that's when it became clear this guy wasn't just Captain America. He was becoming something Disney couldn't manage. He had values, he had conviction, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And that's where the story turns. Because corporations don't delete actors with contracts. They delete actors with integrity. They don't fire them. They don't blast them in the press. They do something worse. They erase them quietly. Evans didn't cause drama. He didn't break a deal. He didn't burn bridges. He just stopped getting the call. And the scariest part, no one at Marvel seemed surprised, because the studio had already moved on, spinning out content at breakneck speed, launching new characters, rebranding its identity, as if the men and women who built the MCU were just placeholders. And that's the tragedy. Not that Chris Evans is missing, but that his absence Silence is by design. At first, Chris Evans was everything Disney wanted. Clean-cut, wholesome, all-American, easy to market. But somewhere along the way, something changed. He stopped being just a face for the brand and started becoming a voice for values, a voice for accountability, a voice Disney couldn't script. And in a world built on control, that's a problem. Because think about what Evans represented. A character who always chose right over easy. A public figure who refused to be just another celebrity puppet. A man who spoke honestly, even when it ruffled feathers. Especially when it ruffled feathers. Most actors toe the line. They play the game. They smile, nod, and recite the press junket answers like clockwork. But Evans? He strayed from the script. When Lightyear received backlash over a same-gender kiss, Disney stayed quiet. Evans didn't. He didn't dodge. He didn't water it down. He said, "The real truth is, those people are idiots. They'll be wiped off like dinosaurs." Now imagine being a Disney executive reading that quote. No spin, no PR polish, just raw conviction. That's not the kind of loyalty the Mouse House rewards. Because Chris Evans was never just an employee. He was becoming a symbol, not of Disney, but of independent integrity. And for Disney, that's the most dangerous thing of all. Because a symbol can't be controlled. You can't silence a symbol without looking like the villain. So what do? You bury it. You don't make it public. You don't issue statements. You simply stop offering roles. You quietly remove his name from scripts. You let the character drift, just vanish. And when people ask, what happened to Cap? You give them half answers, deflections, shrugs, because silence isn't messy. Silence doesn't trend. Silence erases. That's how you deal with an actor who won't conform. Not with confrontation, but with omission. Chris Evans wasn't phased out. He was methodically removed. Not because he failed to deliver, but because he delivered too much. Too much truth, too much heart, too much authenticity. And in a franchise increasingly built on CGI, speed, and spin, that kind of authenticity is a threat. Let's be clear, Steve Rogers didn't just vanish because of scheduling or story limitations. He vanished because acknowledging him would mean confronting everything Marvel is trying to forget. Let's break it down. At the end of Endgame, Steve Rogers passes the shield to Sam Wilson, a moment that should have been the beginning of a new chapter, with Steve as a mentor, a presence, even just a whisper of guidance. But instead, silence. In The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Steve's name is barely mentioned. There's no emotional follow-up, no visit, no letter, not even a line of advice passed down. It's as if the man who saved the universe just stopped existing. In fact, the most attention he gets post-Endgame is a joke. He's on the moon or something. That's it. That's how Disney chose to explain away the emotional core of their biggest franchise. And look, this isn't about disrespecting Sam Wilson. Anthony Mackie is a phenomenal actor, and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier had moments of brilliance. But what was missing? Closure. Steve's perspective, his voice, his presence. Not because Sam wasn't worthy, but because Marvel wasn't willing to do the work. They weren't interested in legacy. They were chasing momentum. And here's the ugly truth. Chris Evans was too connected to the original spirit of the MCU. He represented a tone, a seriousness, a sense of purpose that doesn't fit in the Phase 5 formula. Bringing him back, even as an aging mentor, would mean bringing back the weight of those early films, the sacrifices, the morality, the meaning. And meaning doesn't play well in a content assembly line, especially when Marvel's current strategy revolves around fast turnover, younger audiences, and multiverse resets. So they made a choice. They shelved Steve Rogers. They stopped asking questions about his whereabouts. They let fans speculate, argue, wonder, without offering a single answer. Because silence is cheaper than resolution. And now, a man who once held the universe together is a footnote, a whisper, a rumor. Steve Rogers, the hero who fought for every inch of dignity, is now reduced to, he's probably on the moon. And for the fans who grew up with him, who cried when he said goodbye, that's not just lazy writing, that's betrayal. While Disney tried to quietly phase him out, Chris Evans didn't fade. He evolved. He didn't fight back with angry tweets or industry exposés. He didn't beg to be called. Instead, he chose peace. And that, in today's Hollywood, is revolutionary. In the years since Endgame, Evans has done something few megastars manage. He's rebuilt his identity from scratch, and he's done it on his own terms. You might have heard of Pain Hustlers, the gritty pharmaceutical crime drama with Emily Blunt, or Red One, a holiday action comedy alongside Dwayne Johnson that's already poised to become a major franchise. But these aren't just next roles. They're statements. They show range, depth, direction. But even more telling than his movie choices is what Evans is doing behind the scenes. In 2022, he launched a starting Point, a civic engagement platform aimed at helping Americans reconnect with their representatives. Not a movie, not a brand, a platform built for education, not clout. While Marvel was busy cranking out Secret Invasion, Echo, and Agatha all along, Chris Evans was building something that actually matters. And he did it without capes, without cameos, without CGI. He found his compass without Marvel. In interviews, he chooses his words carefully. He doesn't roast Disney, he doesn't stir up drama, but the distance is undeniable. As much as I love the role, he said, it just feels like something I should leave where it is. That's not ego, that's boundaries. He's not chasing the spotlight, he's chasing meaning. And the irony? Now that he's finally free, Marvel wants him back because Phase 5 is falling apart. Marvel once felt unstoppable, but now it's cracking. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania was a mess. The Marvels flopped. Secret Invasion bombed hard. Echo barely registered. And with every release, more fans check out. More critics shrug. More audiences say what they never used to say. I'm tired of this. Marvel fatigue isn't just real. It's rampant. And it's not because people don't like superheroes anymore. It's because the stories stopped mattering. Marvel used to be about arcs, about growth, about heart. Now, it's about setups and spin-offs, cameos and content. Characters pop in and out of timelines like chess pieces on a marketing calendar. And through all the noise, one question echoes louder than ever. Where's Cap? Scroll through Reddit. Dive into YouTube comments. The most requested return isn't another Loki variant. It's not some multiverse twist. It's Steve Rogers. People don't just miss the character, they miss the feeling he brought, the weight, the conscience, the legacy. Marvel has plenty of spectacle. What it's missing is soul. And now they're realizing it. Secret Wars is being framed as a soft reboot, a last-ditch effort to recast the old guard, rewrite the rules, and bring things back to basics. But here's the twist. They may be too late. Because Chris Evans? He doesn't need the MCU anymore. Chris Evans could have come back. He could have done the cameo, the flashback, the multiverse variant, but he didn't. Not out of bitterness, not out of spite. He stayed away because he respects the role more than the studio ever did. To him, Captain America wasn't a brand. It wasn't a meme or a post-credits cameo. It was a responsibility. And when Marvel stopped treating it with that same weight, he walked. Not with a press release, not with a public feud, with dignity. And in doing so, he proved something no studio executive wants to admit. You can't erase a symbol. You can try to silence it, ignore it, pretend it never mattered, but you can't wipe what it represents. Chris Evans is still Captain America, not because of the suit or the shield or the studio, but because of the choices he made when no one was watching. The kid from Brooklyn who never backed down, he's still here, just not where Disney expected him to be. And maybe that's the most heroic thing of all.